During this demonstration, we'll take a little bit more of an in-depth look into how MetaVis Architect can help you design and provision your information architecture to SharePoint. Specifically, we'll start off by creating a new content type, populating it with columns, and then creating a new list and including that content type within that list. Finally, we'll provision the entire information architecture into your SharePoint environment. So starting off by creating a content type, we'll select the type object from our palette and drop it into a convenient place within our diagram. The system will create the object for me and allow me to enter the name. So I will use name sales contacts. Now that we have the content type, we're ready to begin populating with columns. Now there's a couple different ways to do that. One option is we can reuse columns that are already being used in other content types. So for example, here we have an address and we know that we want to use this specific column in our sales contact. So let's go ahead and just simply drag it over, and you can see MetaVis Architect will put it there for you. We can also take the business phone and just about any other objects that we would like, or just about any other columns that are available within any of your content types here. We can also create our own content type. So let's say I create a choice field. I'll just click on it in the palette and drop it into my content type. And we'll say prospect validation. And that column will be used to indicate whether the prospect is a good prospect, a bad prospect, or future prospect. So once I created that object, I can go ahead and change some of the attributes. Now for a choice field, I can actually populate the attributes that go with the choice field. So I'm going to go ahead and double click on this field and say good prospect, bad prospect, or future prospect. Now when this content type is actually created within SharePoint, this information will also be included with it. The last thing we really need to do, assuming that we've completed all the columns that we want, is to create the inheritance for this specific content type. Now this content type will be inherited from our item field, which is item content type, which is right here. So let's go ahead and establish that inheritance. So we'll click on the source, click on the target, and we now have an inheritance. The sales content type is now inherited from item. So the next logical thing to do is actually to create a list, or if you have a list, you can just use one of those. But we need to create a list that will use this content type called sales contacts. So let's go ahead and do that now. Again, just find a place where you'd like the list to be placed, and we'll just use this area here. Click on the list inside the palette, press on the diagram, and you'll be presented with a little wizard for creating the list. So we're going to call it our sales leads, and create the type of the list. In this case, we're going to just use a custom list. There we go. Click finish, and the system will go ahead and provision that list for us. Okay, now the list has been created. Click OK, and we should go ahead and see that list shortly displayed on the diagram. There we go, sales leads. And so now we have a list. It already has by default 2 other content types in it, but we're going to go ahead and create our own, add our own content type to it. So let me just stretch it out to give it a little bit more room. I'm going to grab sales contacts, which is right here, and just simply drag it over to the content to the list itself. Similar to us creating columns, in this case we're just creating a new column, positioning a new content type inside the list. So at this point we've created the list with our content type, and we're ready to provision it to SharePoint. In order to provision to SharePoint, what we do is we create a compare report. Let's take the compare report, which is the one that says compare with the last version. We'll click on that. We can also achieve the same thing by right-clicking on the site itself. It'll ask us to save our diagram and produce a report. So this report details the differences that will be provisioned to the SharePoint environment. So you see here we've created a new content type called sales contents. There's been a new attribute created called process validation, and a few other things. Now you can go ahead and right click on each specific option and create it in SharePoint by selecting this option, or you can click on the entire group and do that. So I'm going to go ahead and press on that and just to create them all in SharePoint. So as you can see, the SharePoint has at this point been updated. Let's go ahead and take a look at the SharePoint environment itself. So we can do that by right clicking on the site and going through and selecting the view in browser option. We'll sign in. Okay, and let's take a look at our selection of lists that we have now. Okay, so there's our list called sales leads. Let's go ahead and drill into that. Let's take a look at some of the list attributes that we have here. So first thing is, let's take a look at the content types, and you can see that our content type called sales contacts has been created, as well as the columns that go along with that content type. If you click on the content type itself, you can actually see all the information that's been included in it. So this was a quick example of how to create a content type, create a list, include the content type that we created into the list, and actually provision everything into SharePoint.